The metric I'd like to do a deep dive on for customer success is going to be net retention and gross retention rates. We're going to go over both, and we're going to go over why both are important to measure rather than looking at just one in isolation. So a few notes here on this metric. One, you're really going to have to choose a time frame. So if somebody asks you, what is your net retention rate or what is your gross retention rate? The question actually isn't really complete. You have to add a time frame to that question. So what is your net retention rate for last year, last quarter, or last month? And what is your gross retention rate for a particular time frame? This isn't something that you can just measure in isolation. It's time bound, and the time definition really matters. So the best way to visualize and communicate what your net retention and gross retention rates are is with a waterfall chart. So we're going to walk through both of these on the same chart, and you're actually going to be able to report on both from the same chart. So we're going to graph your starting ARR here. Then we're going to graph your churn, contraction, expansion, and your endpoint, or ending ARR. And I'm going to say, because the definition matters, this time frame covers last year. Y-axis here is going to be dollars. So let's say your starting ARR is $1 million. Then, during the same period, you churned $100,000. And the remaining customer base contracted $50,000. This is actually going to be your gross retention rate. And it's going to be 85%. So of the starting ARR, you churned a certain amount, you contracted a certain amount, and what you're left with, so the total, you reduced the amount by 150K, so your remaining is 850K, or an 85% gross retention rate. Then, during the same time frame, you were able to expand the customer base by $300,000. And the net of all of these adjustments is $1.15 million. So you started with $1 million, you lost $100,000, lost $50,000, grew $300,000, and then the net of all of those actions is $1.15 million. So this line here is your net retention rate, and you have a net retention rate of 115%. The reason to isolate the two is you may have very aggressive expansion and contraction rates, and it may look like your net retention is incrementally higher or just a small bit above 100%, but it's really not taking a look at how much movement is happening in those other areas. So if you're losing a lot of your customer base and you have to make up for it by an aggressive amount of expansion, there's usually a lot of cost and activity and effort to manage both of those extremes. So looking at your net retention in isolation doesn't give you the whole story. You really need to look at how much movement is happening on the contraction and churn and expansion base to know how efficient your customer success team can be at growing the customer base.